You're not a priority anymore. Those 5 words hit me like a cold punch straight to the chest. I sat there, my hands still resting on the dinner table, the knife and fork suddenly feeling unbearably heavy. The warm kitchen seemed to shrink around me, the ticking of the wall clock pounding louder in the silence that followed. Each second, stretching into an eternity. I looked up at my son, the boy I once cradled through sleepless nights, walked to school in the rain, and sacrificed everything for so he could have a better life. His eyes held no anger, no real indifference either. It was as if he was stating a fact he had carefully considered, and my feelings simply didn't matter. I wanted to ask, why? But the words lodged in my throat. In that moment, I wanted to scream, yet also to disappear. Memories flooded my mind the first day I held him in the hospital, the afternoons when he'd come running into my arms after school, and now they felt distant, as if they belonged to another story, another mother, another family. Outside the window, the October sky was heavy with dark clouds, as though the weather itself conspired with the weight pressing on my chest. I heard the sound of cars passing by, laughter drifting from the neighbor's yard. The world kept moving, but for me, time had stopped, and deep inside, I knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. Before we continue with the rest of the story, please comment where you're listening to this from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's strange how life can feel perfectly normal, right up until the moment it isn't. The week before my son's words shattered something inside me. Everything had seemed ordinary. I still woke up at 6:30 every morning. The house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the faint chirping of sparrows outside my bedroom window. I'd make myself a cup of coffee black, no sugar, just the way I'd been drinking it for decades, and settle by the window seat in the kitchen. It was my favorite spot in the house, the place where I could watch the neighborhood come to life. From that window, I'd see Mrs. Henderson walking her tiny terrier, Mr. Alvarez, leaving for work in his dented blue pickup, and the Martin kids rushing to catch the school bus with backpacks bouncing on their shoulders. These little rituals gave my mornings a sense of comfort, stability. A few times that week, my son called in the evenings. His voice sounded tired, distracted, but that wasn't unusual. Life, after all, is busy when you're raising kids and trying to pay the bills. I never expected him to linger on the phone like he did when he was younger. I was happy just to hear his voice. "Mom, how are you? Need anything?" He'd ask quickly, almost like a formality. "I'm fine, dear," I'd reply, "just keeping busy." I started knitting another blanket for the twins. That's nice," he'd say, but his tone carried something distant. At the time, I told myself not to read too much into it. On Friday, he dropped by with the kids for dinner. I made my famous pot roast, the one he used to request for his birthday every year, and baked an apple pie for dessert. The children ran through the house like a whirlwind, their laughter echoing in the hallways, filling the air with a joy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. After dinner, I sat with my son on the couch while the kids watched cartoons. I told him about my upcoming doctor's appointment, about how I'd been feeling more tired lately, and about the new neighbor who had moved in down the street. He nodded, half listening, scrolling through his phone. I didn't mind. At least he was there, sitting next to me. Looking back now, I see how I mistook his physical presence for emotional closeness. I didn't notice the small cracks in our conversations, the way he avoided meeting my eyes when we talked about the future, or how he changed the subject whenever I brought up anything about my will, my home, or my savings. Saturday came and went without a call from him. I spent the day tending to my garden, pulling out the last of the summer tomatoes, and preparing the soil for the cold months ahead. My hands worked mechanically, but my mind wandered. I thought about how quiet the house had become since my husband passed, about how much I looked forward to those rare family dinners. If someone had told me that the next time I saw my son, he would look me in the eye and say I was no longer a priority, I would have laughed, or cried, or maybe both, because at that point, I still believed that love was something permanent, that no matter what life threw at us, we would always be each other's safe place. I didn't know yet that a storm was coming, and I was standing right in its path. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of lazy day when the sky looks washed out and the air feels heavy with the promise of rain. I was in the kitchen, peeling apples for another pie, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I smiled to myself. My son hadn't said he was coming over, but surprise visits were always welcome. I quickly wiped my hands on a towel and peeked through the lace curtains. He was alone. No kids. No groceries. Just him, stepping out of the car with a purposeful stride that didn't quite match the casual nature of our usual visits. The moment he walked through the door, I sensed something was off. He didn't kiss my cheek like he always did. He didn't comment on the smell of cinnamon and sugar in the air. Instead, he dropped his keys on the counter and leaned against it, arms crossed, looking like a man about to deliver bad news. "Mom, we need to talk," he began. My heart sank. Those 4 words, "we need to talk," never seemed to precede anything good. "Of course," I said, motioning toward the kitchen table. "Sit down. Let me pour you some coffee." "I don't want coffee," he replied quickly, almost sharply. I sat down instead, folding my hands in my lap to hide the sudden trembling. "What's wrong?" he exhaled, staring at the floor for a moment, before lifting his gaze to mine. "You're not a priority anymore, Mom." The words landed like a physical blow. My ears rang. I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry. What?" "I mean," he shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I have a family now. A wife, kids, responsibilities. I can't keep dropping everything for you. You're going to have to start figuring things out on your own." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was scrambling to process what he'd just said. This was my child, the boy I had carried for 9 months. The one whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose fevers I had soothed, whose dreams I had nurtured. And now, in my own kitchen, he was telling me I was, what? A burden? An afterthought? "I've never asked you to drop everything," I managed to say, my voice thinner than I intended. It's not just about that," he interrupted. "It's about boundaries. I can't be everything for everyone. You'll have to get used to being independent." Independent. As though the decades I'd spent raising him, supporting him through college, helping with his first mortgage, none of that counted as independence. A silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Outside, the first drops of rain began to patter against the windows. "I see," I finally said, though in truth, I didn't see at all. I felt like the ground beneath my feet had shifted, leaving me unsteady and unsure where to step next. He stood up, clearly eager to end the conversation. "I'll call you later this week," he said, already heading for the door. I didn't follow him. I just sat there, staring at the half-peeled apples on the counter, the knife still resting where I'd set it down. My chest ached, with a heaviness I hadn't felt since my husband's funeral. Somewhere deep inside, a small, cold realization took root. Something had changed between us, and there was no going back. "I just want to check if you're still listening. If so, please type a 1-inch the comments. And if you feel a connection to my story, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated." That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. My son's words replayed over and over in my mind, each repetition cutting a little deeper. "You're not a priority anymore, Mom." I thought of all the sacrifices I had made. The times I skipped buying new shoes for myself so I could pay for his baseball cleats. The nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. My fingers sore from pushing a needle through thick fabric. The years of putting aside my own dreams so his could take flight. And now, here I was, 68 years old, widowed, living alone in the same house where I had rocked him to sleep as a baby, being told I was no longer important. I got up, pulled on my robe, and padded into the living room. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet earth drifted in through the cracked window. I turned on the lamp by my recliner, its warm light spilling over the wooden coffee table where my husband's old leather briefcase sat. I hadn't opened it in years, but I knew exactly what was inside. The will. It had been drawn up shortly after my husband passed away. At the time, I had been clear. Everything we owned, the house, the savings, even the heirloom jewelry passed down from my grandmother, would go to our son. It felt right then. He was our only child. Who else would I leave it to? But now, staring at that briefcase, I felt a slow, burning shift inside me. Something my son said kept echoing: boundaries. Independence. If I was to be independent, maybe it was time to take control of my own future. I sat down, pulled the briefcase closer, and opened it. The familiar scent of old paper rose up. There it was, the neatly typed document with my husband's and my signatures in blue ink. I traced the letters with my fingertip, remembering the day we signed it. Back then, we had done it with love, with trust. But trust, I was learning, can change. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about sending a message not to my son, but to myself, that I still had choices, that I could still protect the life I had built. I picked up the phone and called Marlene, my oldest friend. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but warm. "Marlene, I'm sorry to call so late," I said. I need the number of that lawyer you used when you updated your will last year." There was a pause. Then she said softly, "Are you sure, Helen?" "Yes," I replied, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "It's time." The next morning, I called the lawyer's office and scheduled an appointment. The receptionist offered a slot 2 weeks out, but I insisted on sooner. She found me a cancellation for the following Tuesday. When I hung up, I felt an odd sense of relief. Not joy, exactly, but a quiet affirmation that I was doing something for me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just reacting to life, I was taking the wheel. As I made myself a cup of tea, I glanced at the family photos on the wall. My son's wedding day, the birth of his first child, all moments I had celebrated with genuine happiness. I wondered what he would think when he found out about the changes I planned to make. But that was a thought for another day. For now, I had a meeting to prepare for and a new chapter to begin. The following Tuesday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of morning where the clouds seemed to hang so low they brushed the rooftops. I dressed carefully, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to remind myself of who I used to be, a woman who carried herself with dignity, no matter the weather. I chose my navy blue coat, the one my late husband had bought me on our 25th anniversary, and a silk scarf patterned with delicate white lilies. The law office was in a refurbished Victorian house downtown. Its brick facade was softened by ivy climbing the walls, and a polished brass plaque by the door read, "Harper and Associates, Attorneys at Law." As I stepped inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and old books. A young receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Bennet? Mr. Harper will be right with you. Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water, thank you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. When she returned with a glass, I sat in one of the upholstered chairs in the waiting area, my hands wrapped around the cool glass, as though it could anchor me. A large window overlooked the street, where people hurried by under umbrellas, their faces blurred by the rain. A few minutes later, the door to the inner office opened, and a tall man in his early 60s stepped out. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore a charcoal suit that looked well worn but well kept. "Helen Bennet?" he asked with a kind smile. "Yes," I said, standing. "Come in, please." Inside, his office felt more like a study than a workspace. Books lined the walls, and a brass desk lamp cast a warm glow over neatly stacked folders. He gestured for me to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. "So," he began, folding his hands, "I understand you'd like to update your will. Can you tell me a bit about what's prompting this change?" He hesitated. There's always a moment when you have to decide how much of your heart to expose to a stranger. But his calm, patient demeanor made it easier to speak. "My son told me recently that I'm not a priority anymore," I said slowly, each word tasting bitter. "I've supported him his whole life. But now I think it's time I take care of myself. I want to ensure that the things I've worked for go where they'll truly be valued." He nodded thoughtfully, jotting down a few notes. "That's a very personal decision, Mrs. Bennet. Do you have someone else in mind as a beneficiary?" "Yes," I said, the answer coming quicker than I expected. "My niece, Emily. She's been there for me in ways my own son hasn't. I want her to have the house, the savings, and my mother's jewelry. The rest, I'll leave in a charitable trust." As we discussed the details, he asked questions I hadn't even thought of about medical directives, power of attorney, even digital accounts. By the time we finished, an hour had passed, and I felt as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. He handed me a folder. "Here's a draft of the changes. Look them over, and we'll finalize everything next week." As I left the office, the rain had stopped, and a pale light was breaking through the clouds. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck, feeling a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about spite. It was about reclaiming the power I'd given away, piece by piece, over the years. For the first time in a long while, I was walking forward, and the path was mine alone. It was barely 3 days after my meeting with Mr. Harper when I noticed the first flicker of suspicion in Michael's eyes. It was subtle the way he paused in the kitchen doorway, watching me over the rim of his coffee mug. The morning sunlight caught the steam rising from his cup, but his gaze was sharper than usual, probing, as if trying to read my thoughts. We were sitting at opposite ends of the table. I was buttering toast, my hands moving with deliberate calm, while he flipped through some paperwork bills, insurance forms, something with a scattering of sticky notes on top. Every so often, he'd glance at me, not quite meeting my eyes, and then back down at the papers. "Did you have an appointment this week?" he asked casually, though his voice carried that thin thread of control he always used when he wanted a specific answer. "Yes," I said lightly, setting my knife down. "With my doctor." That wasn't a lie exactly. I had seen my doctor earlier in the week, but it wasn't the appointment he was trying to fish for. His brow furrowed slightly. "You didn't mention it." "I didn't think it was worth mentioning," I replied, taking a slow sip of tea. "It was just a routine checkup." He hummed under his breath, as if unconvinced, then changed the subject, but not before I caught that calculating glint in his eyes. Later that day, I found him in the living room, sitting in my favorite armchair, thumbing through my address book. The sight stopped me cold in the doorway. "What are you doing with that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, pretending surprise. "Just looking for Aunt Clara's number. Thought I'd give her a call." "Hi." I crossed the room and took the book from his hands. "You could have asked." For a moment, we locked eyes, mine steady, his searching. Then he shrugged, leaning back in the chair. "You've been different lately, Mom. Distracted. I just want to make sure everything's all right." "I'm fine," I said, perhaps too quickly. That evening, I began to notice other small intrusions. The stack of mail I kept neatly on the counter was slightly disordered, as though someone had rifled through it. A drawer in my desk sat open by a fraction of an inch, though I was certain I had closed it. Even the drawer where I kept my checkbook and important papers felt disturbed, like the items had been shifted just enough to betray another's touch. Michael had always been careful with his control, never overt, never giving me reason to openly challenge him. But now, it felt as if he was circling, waiting for me to slip, to reveal whatever I was keeping from him. I realized, with a slow chill spreading through me, that my decision to change the will had set something in motion. He didn't know the details yet, but he could sense it, the shift in the air, the way a storm smells before it breaks. And storms, I knew, could be deadly. "I just want to check if you're still listening. If so, please type a 1-inch the comments. And if you feel a connection to my story, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell to stay updated." It was a Sunday afternoon when Michael finally decided to test the waters. The air outside was crisp with early autumn, leaves scattering across the driveway in little golden whirlwinds. I had been in the kitchen, kneading dough for a loaf of bread, letting the rhythm calm me. He came in without a word at first, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the tile floor. He poured himself a glass of water, but instead of leaving, he leaned against the counter across from me, watching. "Mom," he began, his tone deceptively light. "I was looking over some things last night, just trying to get our paperwork in order." I kept my eyes on the dough, my hands working methodically. "What sort of things?" He shrugged. "You know, bills, insurance policies, your will." The last word was dropped like a pebble into still water, and I felt the ripples reach me immediately. I didn't look up, but I slowed my kneading just slightly enough for him to notice. "My will?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, taking a slow sip of water. I realized it's been a while since we reviewed it. Thought maybe we could sit down and go through it together. My pulse quickened, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "I don't think that's necessary. Everything's in order." "That's the thing," he said, setting his glass down with a soft click. "I want to make sure everything is in order. You know, in case something happens." There was an edge under his words, a faint note of ownership, as though my affairs were already his to manage. "I appreciate your concern, Michael," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "But my will is my business," he smirked faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, I just think if we're going to handle things as a family, we should be on the same page." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and faced him fully. "Being on the same page doesn't mean I hand over the pen." Something flickered in his expression. Irritation, maybe even a flash of anger before he masked it. "All right, Mom. No need to get defensive." He left the kitchen a moment later, but I could feel the tension humming in the air long after he was gone. That night, I took extra care to lock away the new documents Mr. Harper had prepared for me. I even hid the keys in a place I knew Michael wouldn't think to look. But deep down, I had the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning, and that his next move wouldn't be as subtle. Michael's subtle hints didn't stay subtle for long. Within a week, the tone of our conversations shifted from suggestive to demanding. It started with little intrusions opening my mail before I got to it, casually asking for bank statements, even checking the lockbox in the hallway when he thought I wasn't looking. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store to find him sitting at the dining table, my file folders spread out in front of him. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing with those?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Relax, Mom," he said, waving a hand. "I was just organizing them. You've got stuff scattered all over old tax returns mixed in with your insurance paperwork. It's a mess." "They were fine where they were," I replied, setting my grocery bags down with more force than necessary. "Those are my private documents." He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "Private? Mom, I'm your son. Who else would you trust? You're not getting any younger, and you don't always remember where you put things." The sting of his words hit me harder than I expected. He had never talked to me like that before, not with such cold bluntness. "I remember just fine," I said evenly. "And I'll thank you to leave my things alone," he scoffed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm trying to make sure you're taken care of. What if something happens and nobody knows where anything is? That's why I have a lawyer." I shot back, and for the briefest second, I saw his jaw tighten. From that moment, his visits took on a new, almost predatory energy. He'd drop by, unannounced, always when I was alone. He'd hover in the kitchen, the living room, even follow me down the hall. I could feel his eyes tracking every move I made, as though waiting for me to slip up and leave something unattended. The worst came on a rainy Thursday evening. I was in the den reading when he showed up, dripping wet from the downpour. He didn't bother with small talk. "I need you to sign something," he said, pulling a folder from under his coat. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. "Just an update you're making me executor. It's easier if I handle everything." I shook my head. "I'm not signing anything without my lawyer present." His smile was thin and humorless. "You're being paranoid, Mom. This is for your own good." When I refused again, he stuffed the folder back into his coat and left without another word. But the way he slammed the door made the windows rattle, and the sound stayed with me long after he was gone. That night, lying in bed, I realized something with chilling clarity. Michael wasn't going to give up, and if I didn't prepare myself, the next time he came, he might not just bring papers, he might bring something much worse. The next encounter was the one that stripped away any illusions I still held about Michael's intentions. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of rain against the windows usually brought me comfort. I had just set a loaf of banana bread on the cooling rack when I heard his car in the driveway. He didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place. The look in his eyes made my chest tighten. Gone was the casual mask he wore during previous visits. This time, his face was set in a hard, determined line. "Mom," he said, shutting the door behind him with a deliberate slowness, "we need to talk. Now." I kept my tone calm. "If this is about those papers again, I've already—" "It is." He cut me off, stepping closer. "And I'm done asking nicely." The words landed like a slap. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed so much for, was standing in my living room, speaking to me like an adversary. "I'm not signing anything, Michael," I said, my voice steady, but my hands trembling slightly. He took another step forward, close enough that I could smell the sharp scent of cologne, mixed with damp wool. "If you don't make me executor, you're going to regret it. You think you can trust that lawyer of yours? He's just after your money, too." "Ah." I crossed my arms, trying to mask the unease bubbling inside me. "This isn't about the lawyer. It's about you trying to take control of my life before I'm gone." His laugh was humorless and low. "You're not exactly making it easy to trust you, Mom. You forget things. You get confused. What happens when you can't pay the bills? When you end up in some awful state facility because no one stepped in?" It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Each word was laced with a kind of calculated cruelty, designed to make me doubt myself. "Michael," I said quietly, "I may be old, but I'm not blind. I see exactly what you're doing." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe rage. Then he exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. "Fine," he muttered, his voice tight. "But don't come crying to me when you've messed everything up." When the door slammed this time, it felt like the end of something. The end of the unspoken trust between us. The end of the version of Michael I thought I knew. And as I stood there, the rain still tapping against the glass, I realized we had crossed into dangerous territory. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. It was about power. And my own son had just declared war. I just want to check if you're still listening. If so, please type a 1-inch the comments. And if you feel a connection to my story, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated. That night, I didn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but its echo seemed to linger in my chest. Every creak of the old house felt louder, every shadow longer. I replayed Michael's words again and again. "You're going to regret it." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And it terrified me. But fear, I've learned, can either paralyze you or push you into action. By morning, my decision was made. I would take steps to protect myself, quietly and methodically, without Michael suspecting a thing. The first call I made was to Thomas, my attorney of over 20 years. He was more than a lawyer. He was a family friend, someone who'd known me before my husband passed. I told him I needed an appointment, and when he asked if everything was all right, I simply said, "Not exactly, and I'd prefer to talk in person." Huh. At the office 2 days later, I explained the situation in detail. The pressure, the threats, the manipulation. Thomas listened without interrupting, his brow furrowing deeper with each word. "Mary," he said finally, "you need to update your will. Not just update it, restructure it entirely so that Michael can't touch a dime without strict oversight." He suggested setting up a trust, appointing a third-party executor, and placing my assets in accounts only I could access. It felt cold, clinical, but necessary. Next, I contacted the bank. The manager, a kind woman named Linda, helped me open a new account in a different branch across town. I transferred enough funds to cover at least 2 years of expenses, in case Michael tried to freeze or drain my existing accounts. I also began moving small valuables, jewelry, important documents, family heirlooms into a safe deposit box. It was a slow process, one item at a time, so Michael wouldn't notice anything missing during his visits. But the hardest part wasn't the legal maneuvering or the financial safeguards. It was the emotional shift, the quiet acknowledgement that my own son had become someone I had to protect myself from. At home, I kept my face neutral whenever we spoke. I didn't let on that anything had changed. I still made him coffee when he dropped by, still asked about his work, still smiled when he spoke about the kids. But beneath that calm exterior, I was building walls, brick by brick, that he would never see coming. And every time I locked my front door at night, I felt a small measure of control returning. I wasn't just waiting for him to make the next move, I was preparing for it. Because if Michael wanted a battle over my life, my home, and my legacy, he was about to find out that I wasn't as defenseless as he thought. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. One of those quiet, unremarkable days when you think nothing of importance could possibly occur. The sky outside was pale and overcast, the kind of weather that made me want to stay inside with a pot of tea and an old mystery novel. I was in the living room, dusting the bookshelf, when I heard my phone buzz on the side table. The name on the screen made my stomach knot. Michael. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for whatever mood he was in. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone artificially cheerful. "Just checking in. How's your day?" I answered politely, though my guard was up. We exchanged the usual pleasantries: weather, health, the grandkids. Then, almost casually, he added, "By the way, don't worry about the electric bill this month. I already took care of it. Figured I'd just use your account instead of bothering you." The words landed like a cold splash of water. "Used my account?" I kept my voice steady. "Oh? How did you manage that?" He laughed lightly. "Well, I still have the online banking password from when I helped you last year. Don't tell me you changed it." I didn't answer right away, pretending the line had a bit of static. In reality, my mind was racing. He had just confirmed, without realizing, that he still had access to my finances. And if he had gone into my account once, what was stopping him from doing it again? "Michael," I said slowly, "I'd prefer if you asked me before making any transactions, even small ones." "Mom, relax," he replied, his voice dropping into that familiar, slightly patronizing tone. "It's not a big deal. I'm just trying to help." We ended the call soon after, but the damage was done. That slip of his mentioning the account access was exactly the confirmation I needed. Thomas had warned me to assume Michael already had some way into my finances. But now I had proof. I acted immediately. I called the bank, explained the situation, and reset every password. I also added two-step authentication, something Michael wouldn't be able to bypass without having my phone in his hands. Linda, the bank manager, assured me she would flag my account for any unusual activity. But my precautions didn't stop there. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, listing every area of vulnerability: banking, property deeds, insurance policies, even my medical records. I realized that Michael didn't just want my money, he wanted control over every aspect of my life. I began visiting offices in person, speaking directly to managers, requesting that no changes be made without my explicit, in-person approval. Some clerks looked at me with pity, others with curiosity, but I didn't care. Every safeguard I put in place felt like another lock on the doors Michael had been trying to pry open. And still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed him to think I was as trusting and naive as before. If he suspected I was tightening the net around my life, he might change tactics, and I needed him predictable. A week later, my neighbor Marlene stopped by with a bag of fresh tomatoes from her garden. We sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, when she casually mentioned seeing Michael in town. "He was talking to that realtor, you know, the one who's been selling off the bigger properties in our area." Looked like a serious conversation. I smiled and nodded, pretending not to care. But inside, a cold certainty settled over me. Michael wasn't just circling, he was planning his next move, and thanks to his little slip on the phone, I was ready for him. I went to bed that night with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know when the confrontation would come, but I knew it was getting closer. It was a Thursday evening when the storm finally broke. Not a literal storm, though the sky outside was heavy with dark clouds, but the kind that builds in silence until it has no choice but to spill over. I had just finished setting the table for one when I heard Michael's car pull into the driveway. The sound of his tires crunching over the gravel always set my nerves on edge lately, like a warning bell before an unwelcome visitor. I briefly considered not answering the door, But the knock came anyway, firm, insistent, not the kind of knock you can ignore. When I opened it, he stepped inside without waiting to be invited, his jacket still damp from a light drizzle. "We need to talk," he said flatly. I didn't offer coffee or ask about the kids. I just motioned toward the kitchen table. We sat across from each other, the same way we had countless times over the years, except now, the air between us felt charged, dangerous. "I'll get right to it," he began, leaning forward. "This whole secrecy thing you've got going on, it needs to stop. I've noticed you've been moving money around. I know you've been talking to your lawyer. And frankly, I don't understand why you're shutting me out." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "Michael, I have every right to handle my affairs the way I see fit." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your affairs? Mom, these are family matters. If something happens to you, it's me who's going to be left dealing with it all. Don't you think I deserve to be in the loop?" "What I think," I said evenly, "is that you've been pushing me into decisions that are not yours to make. That's not being in the loop. That's taking over." His expression hardened. "I'm trying to protect you. But if you insist on treating me like the enemy, maybe I need to take a different approach." Something in his voice made my skin prickle. "And what exactly does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "I'm not going to sit by while you make mistakes that ruin everything Dad worked for. I've spoken to some people. There are ways to step in legally if a parent can't manage their own affairs anymore." For a moment, I just stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't just threatening to override my will, he was implying he could have me declared incompetent. "That's a dangerous game you're playing," I said quietly. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe, but if it keeps this family's assets safe, it's worth it." I wanted to shout, to demand how my own son could talk to me this way. But instead, I drew in a slow breath. "Michael, let me make one thing clear. I am of sound mind. I can prove it. And if you ever try to challenge that, you'll find out just how prepared I am." His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond right away. I could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating his next move. Finally, he stood, pushing the chair back so hard, it scraped against the tile. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and tight. "Not by a long shot." I watched him walk out, his footsteps heavy, the front door slamming behind him. The sound echoed through the house, rattling more than just the walls. As I sat there alone at the kitchen table, I realized we had crossed into a new phase. Michael wasn't going to back down, if anything. He was going to double his efforts. But so was I. And while he might think he had the upper hand, he didn't yet know the lengths I was willing to go to keep control of my own life. I just want to check if you're still listening. If so, please type a 1-inch the comments. And if you feel a connection to my story, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated. 2 days after that tense confrontation at the kitchen table, I was sitting in my armchair, trying to focus on a crossword puzzle, when the phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but something nudged me to pick up. "Mrs. Dawson?" a woman's voice asked politely. "Yes, speaking. My name is Emily. I hope you don't mind me calling. I work at Greenwood Financial, where your son handles some of his investments. I know this might be unusual, but I felt you should be aware of something." End quote. Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic. I could hear the clatter of keyboards and distant voices in the background. "All right," I said slowly. "Go on." Emily hesitated before speaking again. "Last week, Michael came in asking questions about your accounts, specifically about consolidating them and moving the funds under his management. He claimed you had given him permission. but when I asked for written authorization, he got defensive. I didn't process anything, of course, but I thought you should know. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. He didn't have any paperwork? No, ma'am. And frankly, the way he was pushing, it didn't feel right. I checked internally and saw that you have independent accounts in your name only. If you'd like, I can put a note in the system that no changes can be made without your in-person confirmation. Yes, I said firmly. Do that. And thank you, Emily. You've done the right thing. We ended the call, but my mind was spinning. Michael had clearly started moving beyond veiled threats and into action. But what struck me even more was that a stranger, someone with no stake in my personal life, had stepped in to warn me. That afternoon, I walked to my neighbor Marlene's house under the pretense of borrowing sugar. Sitting at her kitchen table, sipping tea, I decided to test the waters. Have you ever had family try to get involved in your finances? I asked casually. Marlene chuckled. Only every holiday season. But why do you ask? I gave her the outline, leaving out the more explosive details, and she listened intently, her eyes narrowing. You know, she said, my cousin went through something similar. She ended up hiring a care advocate, someone who's legally there to represent her interests, not the family's. Maybe you should look into that. The idea planted itself in my mind like a seed. An advocate could act as an official buffer between me and Michael, documenting everything, ensuring that any attempt to undermine me would have a paper trail. That evening, I made a few discreet calls. By the end of the week, I had an appointment set with a woman named Carol, a retired social worker who now specialized in elder advocacy. When we met at a cafe downtown, she was warm but businesslike, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I've seen sons, daughters, even nieces try to take over, she said matter-of-factly. The key is staying 2 steps ahead. If you work with me, I'll make sure every major decision is documented, witnessed, and impossible to challenge. It felt like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. As I walked home from that meeting, a thought struck me. Michael thought I was cornered. What he didn't realize was that the moment I gained an ally, the game had changed, and not in his favor. It didn't take long for Michael to make his next move, but this time, I was ready. It was a bright Monday morning when he showed up unannounced, striding into the living room with a forced smile. Hey, Mom, he said, dropping onto the couch. You've been hard to reach lately. I stayed in my armchair, my tea still warm in my hands. I've been busy, I said simply. Well, he continued, I think it's time we talk seriously about your property. There's a buyer who's interested, a real good offer, but we'd need to move fast. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the coffee table toward me. Just take a look, he urged. I didn't move to touch it. And whose name would be on the paperwork? He smirked. Yours, of course. But I'd handle all the details, so you don't have to stress. Mard, 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 9, 9, 9, Mard, 9, 9, 9, 9, yours. That's when Carol, my newly appointed care advocate, stepped into the room from the hallway. Michael's eyes widened. He clearly hadn't expected company. Hello, Michael, Carol said pleasantly, but there was steel under her tone. I've reviewed your proposal, and unfortunately, it doesn't serve Mary's best interests. We won't be moving forward. Michael blinked. Way? Yes, she said. Mary has appointed me to review any legal or financial agreements before she signs them. It's all documented. His smile vanished. You're making a mistake, Mom. This woman doesn't know our family. She's going to get in the way. She's here. I said calmly. To make sure no one family or not takes advantage of me. For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw tight. Then he grabbed the folder back, shoving it into his bag. Fine. If you want to waste opportunities, that's on you. Carol didn't flinch. And if you want to present any future offers, you can send them directly to me. In writing. Michael stood abruptly, muttering something under his breath as he headed for the door. I heard the sharp slam as it closed behind him. When the sound faded, Carol turned to me with a reassuring smile. He'll be angry for a while, but anger is easier to manage than silent manipulation. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you, I said. I couldn't have done that alone. She patted my hand. You're not alone anymore. That day, I realized Michael's power over me had cracked. He could no longer corner me with surprise visits or pressure me into rushed decisions. Every move he made would have to go through someone who saw right through him. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew. The balance of this fight had shifted, and now, for the first time, I had the advantage. It was 2 weeks before I saw Michael again. 2 weeks of blissful quiet, no phone calls, no unexpected knocks on the door, no veiled threats disguised as concern. I almost began to believe he'd moved on, maybe found someone else to push around. But peace never lasts when someone is determined to control you. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when I heard his truck pull into the driveway. I peeked through the blinds. He was pacing in the drizzle, one hand clamped around his phone, the other gripping a manila envelope. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I called Carol, my advocate, and put her on speaker. He's here, I whispered. Her voice was steady. Good. Leave the phone on so I can hear everything. End. When I finally opened the door, Michael didn't bother with pleasantries. We need to talk, Mom. Now. He pushed past me into the living room, tracking muddy footprints onto my rug. What's so urgent? I asked, keeping my voice calm. He tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. This is your last chance to help me. I'm drowning here, and you're just sitting on resources you don't even use. If you really loved me, you'd do this. The words hit me like cold water. If I really loved you? I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. He leaned in. His eyes narrowed. Yeah. You've always been stingy. Always holding back. Dad wouldn't have done this to me. It was a low blow, invoking his father, the man who had adored him but would never have condoned manipulation. I straightened my shoulders. Don't you dare talk about your father to justify this. He raised you better than this behavior. Michael scoffed, but his voice cracked. You're not even my priority anymore. You're just in the way. The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, I felt something inside me harden. That's fine, I said evenly. Because you're not mine anymore either. I've already updated my will, and you're no longer in it. His face went pale, then red. You're bluffing. Carol's voice came through the phone, loud enough for him to hear. She's not bluffing, Michael. I've seen the documents. He spun toward the sound, realizing I'd had her listening the entire time. You think this changes anything? He spat. You'll regret this. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood in the silence that followed, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the strange, liberating certainty that I had finally drawn the line. That was the breaking point. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. I just want to check if you're still listening. If so, please type a 1-inch the comments. And if you feel a connection to my story, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated. For a few days after Michael's outburst, the house felt heavier than usual, like the air was thick with the echo of his last words. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, seemed amplified in the silence. But it wasn't fear keeping me tense. It was the knowledge that a chapter of my life had officially closed. The first call came 2 days later. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The second came a few hours after that. This time from a number I recognized: my niece, Ellen. "Aunt Mary," she said gently. "I just saw Michael. He's telling people you've lost your mind, that you're making rash decisions." I sighed. "That doesn't surprise me. He also said you've cut him out of your will," she added. "That's true," I said simply. Ellen was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you. I know how hard that must have been." "Hard?" "Yes." "Necessary?" "Absolutely." I'd spent my entire adult life believing that being a good mother meant unconditional support. But I'd come to realize that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of harm. Love has boundaries, and mine had been crossed too many times. Later that week, Carol came over with coffee and a stack of papers. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. "We need to take the next steps to secure your assets," she said. I nodded. "I don't want to leave any openings for him to come back and cause trouble." Together, we reviewed every account, every property document, every insurance policy. She recommended moving certain funds into a trust that could only be accessed by a charity I supported. I chose the local food bank. "He'll be furious," Carol warned. "But he won't be able to touch a dime." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. But peace is a fragile thing. The following Sunday, after church, I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "I saw Michael at the grocery store." He looked upset, said you've been influenced by outsiders, and that you're isolating yourself. I forced a smile. Sometimes protecting yourself looks like isolation to people who don't respect boundaries. Her eyes softened. "Good for you, dear. Not everyone has the courage." The truth was, I wasn't feeling particularly brave, I was feeling resolute. And that's different. Still, the ripple effects of my decision kept finding their way to me. The following week, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Michael's. I sat with it for a full hour before opening it. "Mom, I don't know why you're doing this. You've always been there for me. Why are you turning your back now, when I need you the most?" I put the letter down halfway through. It was the same cycle. Guilt, blame, desperation, all tangled together in the kind of manipulation I'd come to know too well. I didn't respond. Instead, I went out to my garden and pruned the roses. The act felt symbolic, somehow cutting away the dead parts, so the living could breathe. That evening, Ellen called again. "Aunt Mary," she said cautiously. "Michael's talking about contesting the will." I laughed softly. "He can try, but I've made sure he can't win." For the first time, the weight on my chest felt lighter. I knew there would be more letters, more whispers in the community, maybe even another confrontation. But I also knew I had fortified my life in a way that couldn't be undone. The storm had passed, but I'd built stronger walls. And from inside them, I could finally hear the quiet hum of my own freedom. It was early March, the kind of crisp morning when the frost on the grass sparkles like it's been dusted with diamonds. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when the knock came. It wasn't tentative. It was firm, measured, deliberate. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I saw him, Michael. He was dressed better than usual, wearing a pressed shirt and a dark coat, and he carried nothing but a small leather folder. My pulse quickened. but not from fear. This time I felt steady. I opened the door only halfway. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom, can we talk?" His tone was softer than before, almost rehearsed. I stepped aside, letting him in, but gestured toward the armchair across from mine. "5 minutes," I said. He sat, placing the leather folder on his lap. "I don't want to fight," he began. "I came because I don't like how things ended between us." I waited, saying nothing. He took a breath. "I've been under a lot of stress. I handled things badly. But cutting me out of your will? That's extreme. I'm your son." I met his gaze. "You're my son, yes. But being family doesn't give you the right to treat me like a resource to be managed." "I'm not," he started, then stopped himself. "I just thought it was logical. You don't need all this money, and I could put it to better use. And there it is," I said quietly. "You're not here for reconciliation. You're here for another chance to get what you want." His jaw tightened. "I'm here because I don't want us to end like this." I leaned forward. "Michael, the only reason we're here is because you crossed boundaries I never thought my own child would cross. I've given you every opportunity to be honest, to treat me with respect. Instead, you lied, pressured, and tried to control my future. I won't let that happen again." His eyes flicked to the folder. "If you'd just look at this proposal." I held up my hand. "Number." My voice was calm but final. "Carol has full authority to review anything you want to send. You can leave it with her." The silence stretched between us. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. But maybe I was a version of me who no longer bent under the weight of his expectations. Finally, he stood, sliding the folder back into his coat. "You've changed," he said flatly. "I've grown," I corrected. "And I hope someday you will too." He opened the door but paused on the threshold. For a brief second, I thought I saw something shift in his expression. Maybe regret. Maybe just calculation. But then he was gone. The sound of his footsteps, fading down the walkway. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Instead, I poured the rest of my coffee and stood by the window, watching the frost melt in the morning sun. That was our last real conversation. We would speak in passing at family gatherings, exchange brief and polite words. But the closeness we once had was gone. And I'd made peace with that. Because here's the truth no one tells you about letting go. It's not about stopping love, it's about stopping harm. And once you make that choice, the air feels clearer, the days feel longer, and the life you live is truly yours again. I just want to check if you're still listening. If so, please type a 1-inch the comments. And if you feel a connection to my story, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated. The weeks after that final meeting with Michael were strangely quiet. Not the uneasy silence that used to make me wonder when the next conflict would erupt, but a stillness that felt safe. I woke up each morning without the knot in my stomach, without scanning my phone for messages that would ruin my day before it even began. Carol continued to check in once a week, making sure my affairs stayed secure. She helped me finalize the trust documents and walked me through steps I hadn't even thought about, like updating my power of attorney and setting up alerts in case anyone tried to access my accounts. "It's not paranoia," she told me over coffee one morning. "It's prevention. And prevention is power." I found myself spending more time in the garden again, tending to the roses I'd planted years ago. There was something deeply satisfying about pruning away the dead stems, clearing the weeds, and watching the healthy blooms flourish. It felt like a mirror of my own life, removing what no longer served me so that the good could thrive. One afternoon, Ellen came by with her two little ones. She set a plate of cookies on the counter and smiled. "You seem lighter, Aunt Mary," she said. "I am," I replied, realizing how true it felt. She hesitated, then asked, "Do you think things will ever be okay with Michael again?" I thought about it. Maybe. But okay will never mean going back to how it was. I can forgive him, but trust takes time, and he'll have to earn it. Ellen nodded. That makes sense. I didn't tell her that part of me had already accepted we might never rebuild what was lost. And that was all right. Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed again. By April, I'd started volunteering twice a week at the food bank that would one day receive the bulk of my estate. The work was humbling, sorting boxes, greeting families, handing out fresh produce. It reminded me daily that the legacy I left behind didn't need to be measured in what I gave to my son, but in the good I could do for others. One quiet evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, I thought back to the moment Michael had said, "You're not a priority anymore." It no longer stung the way it once did. Instead, it felt like a turning point the moment I realized that if I wasn't his priority, then I had to make myself mine. I had chosen boundaries over guilt, peace over chaos, self-respect over blind obligation, and in doing so, I'd rediscovered parts of myself I thought had been lost in the shuffle of motherhood and sacrifice. The phone rang just then. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Michael. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but then, with a steady breath, I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice subdued. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "Hi, I'm doing well," I replied. "Busy, but happy." There was a pause. "That's good," he said. "I'm glad." We spoke for less than 3 minutes. No talk of money, no veiled demands, just simple, surface-level conversation. When we hung up, I realized my hands weren't trembling. I felt calm. Maybe this was the start of something new. Not a reconciliation, but a respectful distance. And if that was all we could manage, then I could live with it. As the sky turned to twilight, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, feeling the soft spring breeze on my face. My life was my own again. And for the first time in years, that was enough.